He paid $35 for a quiet life and rode straight into a storm. Late autumn, Arizona. The sky felt endless, the kind of blue that makes you think the world might keep going forever if the land didn't run out first. Caleb Rowan had bought a battered ranch for a sum that sounded like a joke in any saloon, $35, because he wanted distance from the noise, a place where a man's thoughts could finally unclench. But just beyond the warped fence, the wind nudged three figures on ropes, hair drifting like black grass. They were not effigies, they were breathing, barely. Caleb cut them down one by one, palms burning as the coarse fiber bit skin. He carried them through the groaning gate and into a house that smelled of dry wood and old dust. Fire first, then water, then blankets torn into strips. He moved the way a man moves when he decides what kind of man he is. The tallest opened her eyes with a glint that didn't belong to the weak. The second watched him the way a hawk watches a field. The youngest startled at every sound. Suspicion stayed in the room with the smoke. That night the wind slid along the fence like a file, and Caleb sat with his rifle within reach, listening to the stove tick. He hadn't bought peace, he realized. He had bought an address where trouble already lived. By morning, the desert light pushed through warped shutters and drew pale bars across the floor. Hunger did what it always does. It softened stares, not quite into trust, but into a truce. When the tall one finally spoke, her voice worked like a blade that had seen hard use. "Nayeli," she said. "My sisters, Sana and Tiva." Names made the room feel less like a sickbed and more like a crossroads. Names mean you might be called on later. The truth came out slow, like water coaxed from stubborn ground. This land had been theirs, Apache, long before a man named Harry and decided the county was easier to manage when other people's roots were cut. There was a hidden vein of water out here, a lifeline you couldn't see from the surface. Her father and the elders protected it with secrecy. Secrets don't always hold. One night men with money and guns came, the way men with money and guns have always come, loud enough to terrify, quiet enough to be denied. Elders shot, the well poisoned, stores burned. Their mother didn't live to see morning. The three girls survived because they were hidden away, then hunted again because of what they carried. Their father had left a map to the water's true running, split into three pieces so no one person could give it away. Each sister bore a part of the truth, only together would it read like a sentence. Water is life in the desert, but out here it's also law, leverage, and the price of someone else's surrender. We hear that as metaphor now, but if you've ever lived a summer under water restrictions, you know the edge of it. Out west, even today, whole towns are measured in acre-feet and court dates. Truth is, the fight over water never really ended, it just traded horses for hearings.
Caleb listened, jaw tight, coffee cooling in his hand. He had no stake in Apache affairs, not until he cut 3 ropes and carried 3 bodies across his threshold. But leaving them to die would have marked him in a way you can't wash off. Maybe you know that fork in the road, the one where you can walk away and pretend you didn't see, or you can stand there and admit to yourself that you did. What would you choose if the cost was your roof, your fence line, maybe your life? By afternoon, the horizon delivered an answer in dust. Riders came without hurry because men who own the clock don't have to rush. The one in front wore a black coat that moved like a crow against the light. Silas Crowley, Harrian's right hand, sat easy and smiling the way a rattler might smile if it could. He nodded like this was neighborly business. Word was Caleb had guests. Word was those guests belonged to his employer. He offered a deal the way fire offers warmth to kindling. By sunset tomorrow, he said, you bring them into town, or I come back and burn this place to the last nail. Caleb stood there with the screen of the porch door creaking behind him and said the only line that would let him live with himself. They're not going anywhere with you. Crowley left the kind of silence men remember years later. Threats hang in the air even after the dust settles. The next morning, a different set of riders arrived, badges catching light. Sheriff Grant Ellery had the tired posture of a man who knows the law doesn't always have legs, but he brought something heavier than talk, a leather satchel of papers wrapped in oilskin, deeds, sworn statements, and a brittle ledger pried from a drunk's family trunk. On those yellowed lines, payments to men who'd cleared Apache land were listed like groceries. Beside certain entries, the note was colder than the desert night. Well disabled, no survivors. That kind of ink leaves a stain even the powerful can't scrub in daylight. Ellery's plan was blunt. Ride at dawn for Red Mesa, put those papers and the sisters' voices in federal hands, and make it cost Harrion, even in his own home county. But plans on paper are like water on hot rock. You have to catch 'em quick. Caleb looked at Nayeli, at Sana's steady eyes, at Tiva's hands trembling around a tin cup. He had bought his quiet life cheaply. He would not sell theirs. They agreed to testify, not because they suddenly believed the law loved them, but because their father's blood deserved a witness. If you've ever held on to a truth that hurts to speak, you understand that bargain. Courage at interest, payable daily. They prepared. Windows were boarded where the wind cut. The barn doors learned how to bar from the inside. Wire went up between fence posts to narrow the way a horse could come. Watches were set in shifts. The first crack in the distance sounded like a warning shot, because it was. That night, smoke feathered from a far corner of the barn, caught and smothered by Sana's nose and quick hands. The next night, the rope on the water trough was sliced. The necessary spilled into dust. Tracks led away into brush. Tracking them would have been walking into someone else's distance. Caleb doubled the guard instead.
During one of those hours when a man's thoughts get loud, Nayeli said softly, without looking at him, "You could still walk away." Caleb watched the land and answered, "I've done enough walking away." She nodded once, like a verdict. Her people had a word, she said, for a man who stands when no one would blame him for leaving, someone who carries another's fire. He didn't say he'd carry it for them, he said he'd carry it with them. The next morning, a horse lay throat-cut in the pasture, the dust dark where life had run out. Tiva wept open-mouthed. Caleb dug until his shoulders burned and laid the animal down himself. Some burials are for the living. Maybe you've done one, even if it wasn't in dirt. Here's the thing about stories like this. People think the showdown is the story. The gunfire, the black hat villain, the lone good man making a stand. But the soul of it lives in smaller rooms. The stove's patient heat, a shirt mended by careful hands, the inside of a promise taken seriously. In those rooms, fear learns your name, and you choose to speak back anyway. When the final fight came, it came fast, because violence has a way of sprinting to the front of the line. Dust rose and then settled, in the old rhythm bullets know. Crowley fell somewhere out in the scrub, the long thread of him going slack in the brittle grass. Ellery moved like a man who knows how many things can go wrong and still kept going. Hurrian was taken in irons under a sky the same blue as the day this began. That ledger and the sisters' testimony did what fists and fists of money couldn't undo. They made a record. I know record doesn't sound romantic, but ask anyone who's tried to right a wrong years later, the truth doesn't travel well unless you write it down and say it out loud. When quiet finally returned, it wasn't the same quiet Caleb had come to buy. The land itself felt like it exhaled, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to call things by their names. Windows opened, light moved where it hadn't moved in weeks. Ellery rode by now and then with news from town, Hurrian's influence going thin, folks speaking up who had swallowed fear long enough to choke on it. The ranch showed its scars like honest work shows hands. The barn's beams still wore a black kiss from the fire. A small mound in the pasture held a horse that didn't ask to die for anyone's lesson. Fences leaned where the fight had rushed them, but most days ended with sweat on shirts and new wire stretched taut. Sana worked beside Caleb in companionable silence, the clink of nails and the scrape of posts a kind of prayer you say with your shoulders. Nayeli and Tyvo turned the back plot until the soil, stubborn as old men, gave a little. A faint green broke the dirt and nodded in the wind, as if putting down a name. They sat on the porch at day's end, boots dusted, back sore, watching the sky do what it does best out there, bleed gold into rust, into a night sharp enough to cut. Ellery would tip his hat to the sisters, with the kind of respect they didn't get from most men in the territory. Sometimes nobody spoke for long minutes, because some threads are stronger unspoken. Maybe you felt that with people who chose you when they didn't have to, how silence with them isn't empty, but full. Niley said once, quiet as the first cold in autumn, that her father used to tell them, the land remembers the hands that keep it. If you leave under pressure, it waits for you. She looked toward the rows where Green tried to be brave. Caleb said, then we keep it, and we make sure it remembers us for the right reasons. No declaration beyond that, just the kind of agreement you plant, then water, then harvest. You can call this a Western if you need a shelf to put it on. Black hat, white hat, rifles by the door. But I think it's about something we recognize in any century. Water, yes, as power, the cold math that says whoever controls the source controls the price of a neighbor's thirst. Justice, too, not as an idea, but as a ledger entry and a testimony that names what happened and who paid whom. Choice most of all, Caleb shifting from a man craving solitude to a man willing to put his body in the doorway. There's a cost to that. There's also a dividend, a family built on decision, not blood. Maybe you've stood on your own porch, literal or otherwise, watching a dust line form on the distance. Maybe it was a layoff coming, or a diagnosis, or the old wrong that decided to show its face again. Did you feel that click inside, the one that tells you who you'll be when it arrives? Caleb felt it and answered. He decided the people under his roof wouldn't be handed over. He decided that if carrying fire is dangerous, carrying it alone is worse. As for the map, 3 pieces that only meant anything together, that's how I think of the way we drag truth to daylight. One person has the memory. One person kept a paper when no one else thought it mattered. One person is willing to stand up and say the line that makes the room go quiet. Separate, they're fragments. Together, they're direction. The sisters didn't carry a treasure, so much as responsibility. Caleb stepped into that weight and didn't set it down. If you want a neat ending, the story offers one. Crowley is dead. Harrion is locked up. The county's power starts to tilt toward fairness. Red Mesa becomes a place where evidence turns into consequence. But the West, like life, resists tidy. Fences sag again. Wells need tending. Fear tries to grow back in the cracks, especially when the rain is late. The difference now is 4 figures move across the yard together at first light, each with a hand on the same work. Found family, if you like that phrase. I do. It tells the truth. Sometimes you're lucky enough to be chosen by the people you choose. I keep thinking about the price, $35. It sounds like a punchline until you try to tally what was bought. A promise, a siege, a ledger-turned weapon, a grave, a garden, a set of names that won't leave you. There's a cheaper way to live. There's not always a better one. So let me leave you with this. When the world asks for your sunset, by tomorrow bring me what I want or I'll burn it down. What do you do with that day? Do you barter with a bully and call it peace? Or do you board the windows, lay out the ammunition of truth, make tea for the people under your roof, and wait together on the porch for the horizon to show its face? I'm not saying every fight ends the way this one did. I'm saying the fights that matter start the same way. Someone decides not to hand another person over. Out in Arizona, seasons don't change with leaves so much as with light. The mornings came red again, then gold, then usual. The ranch remembered the hands that kept it, and when wind ran its fingers through the fence line, it sounded less like a threat and more like a hymn, the kind you hum when work is honest and the water runs where it should.